Whose car is this? Not good evening, not license and registration, please, not even the standard practiced politeness that most officers manage to maintain even when they don't mean it. Just that. 4 words. Flat. Certain. Delivered through a rain-streaked window by a man whose flashlight was already in Eldon Pruitt's face before his boots had even stopped moving. Eldon did not flinch. His hands were on the steering wheel, 10 and 2 fingers spread wide exactly where any reasonable person could see them, and he had positioned them there the moment he pulled onto the shoulder before the cruiser even came to a full stop behind him. He had done this before. Not this exact thing, but the shape of it, the architecture of it, the specific way a particular kind of night begins. He knew what this was. He had known it since the red and blue lights first exploded in his rearview mirror 2 miles from his driveway on a road he had driven 11,000 times. "This is my vehicle," Eldon said. His voice was the same voice he used in courtrooms. Deep, measured, carrying its own weight without effort, the voice of a man who had learned a long time ago that the quieter you spoke, the more people had to lean in to hear you, and the more they leaned in, the more they were already listening. Officer Dale Croft did not lean in. He was in his late 20s with the build of a man who had played football in high school and never quite adjusted to the fact that the game was over, and he walked with a swagger that was not confidence exactly, but the performance of confidence. Chest pushed forward, chin up, one hand resting near his holster with the casual intimacy of a man who considers that particular gesture a form of punctuation. The flashlight stayed in Eldon's face. The beam was industrial grade, the kind designed to blind, and Croft held it at eye level with the practiced ease of someone who had done this enough times to know it worked. Behind the Mercedes in the passenger side of the cruiser, Officer Paul Greer had stepped out as well. He was 24 years old, and he had been on the force for 14 months, and he was already at this particular moment standing with his arms crossed and his eyes pointed at the road near his own feet, which is the posture of a man who does not want to watch what he is about to watch. "Your vehicle," Croft said. He said it the way you say, "Sure it is," without saying "sure it is." He tilted his flashlight slightly, letting the beam sweep the interior of the Mercedes, the wood-grain dashboard, the stitched leather seats, the garment bag hanging from the dry-cleaning hook in the rear window. The beam came back to Eldon's face. "You want to explain to me what a guy like you is doing in a car like this at 1 in the morning? A guy like you." There it was. Those 3 words doing the work that the law would not let him do directly. Eldon kept his hands on the wheel. He said clearly and without heat, "I live in this neighborhood. I'm returning home from work. May I ask what your reasonable suspicion was for initiating this stop?" The effect was immediate. The legal terminology. Reasonable suspicion, the precise phrase, the correct phrase. The phrase that a man with a Harvard law degree and 30 years on the bench would reach for automatically landed on Croft like a lit match on dry paper. His jaw set, his shoulders squared. The flashlight moved once a sharp little jerk, and when his eyes found Eldon's again through the window, they had something in them that wasn't quite anger yet, but was heading there fast. "A roadside lawyer," Croft said mostly to himself, glancing over the roof of the car at Greer, who still wasn't looking. "Hey, Greer, you hear this guy?" Greer said nothing. Croft turned back to the window. "License, registration, now." Eldon narrated every movement. He said, "My wallet is in my breast pocket. I am reaching for it with my right hand." He said, "My registration is in the glove compartment. I am reaching across with my left hand." He said everything slowly, clearly for the body camera clipped to Croft's chest that he knew was running because in 30 years of presiding over cases involving traffic stops, he had learned that the camera is either your enemy or your witness, and the difference is what you say out loud while it watches. He handed both documents through the window. Croft took them, shone the flashlight on the license. The name read Eldon T. Pruitt. The address was in Oak Ridge Estates. The expiration date was 14 months away. The photograph matched the man in front of him. Everything was perfect. Everything was in order. Croft tapped the card against his knuckles. "Fake," he said. "Not 'this seems irregular' or 'I'll need to verify this.' Just fake. Delivered with the flat certainty of a man making a declaration, not an observation. Eldon looked at him steadily. "That is a state-issued driver's license," he said. "The vehicle is registered in my name. I have been completely cooperative. If you are not writing me a citation for a traffic violation, I am legally entitled to ask if I am free to go." Croft was already moving. He reached past Eldon, past the window frame, past the boundaries of what the law permits without consent, and unzipped the garment bag hanging from the rear hook. Just enough. The flashlight found what was inside. The fabric was heavy and black with the deep pleats and wide bell sleeves, the kind of fabric that has a specific gravity to it, the kind that was not made to be light. It had been cleaned professionally 4 days ago. It was going to be used in a ceremony next week. 3 new attorneys, 2 of whom Eldon had watched grow from nervous first-year law students into people who were going to spend their lives trying to make things right. Croft pulled the zipper down another inch, and he laughed. It was a short sound, wet and ugly, the laugh of a man sharing a joke with himself because no one else was in on it. "What is this?" he said. He looked back at Greer. "Hey, you see this, some kind of costume back here?" Costume? That word. Eldon Pruitt had been a Superior Court judge for 22 years. He had worn that robe through thousands of hearings, hundreds of trials, through moments of great human tragedy and moments of unexpected grace, through the deaths of colleagues and the births of his children, and the passing of his wife, and every ordinary Tuesday morning when the work was not dramatic but it was necessary, and he had shown up and done it anyway. And a 28-year-old man with a flashlight had just called it a costume. Eldon said nothing. He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. When he opened them, something had changed behind them, not hardened exactly, but settled. The way a decision settles when you have finished making it, and there is nothing left to weigh. He was not going to tell this man who he was. Not here. Not on a dark road in the rain where the only witnesses were the wet asphalt and a rookie who was studying his own boots. He was going to let this play all the way out. 90 minutes earlier, the Harlow County Courthouse had been as quiet as it ever gets, which is not very quiet. Buildings like that, marble floors, high ceilings. The accumulated acoustics of decades of argument have a specific kind of silence that isn't really silence at all. It's the absence of voices. The presence of everything those voices left behind. Eldon Pruitt had been in his chambers since 6:30 that morning. He did most of his best thinking in the building after everyone else had left, when the hallways stopped echoing with footsteps and the air conditioner hummed its steady, indifferent note, and the city outside the tall, narrow windows went about its business without asking anything of him. There was a particular stillness that came to the room. Then a stillness that smelled of old law books and the lemon furniture polish his clerk used every Friday morning, and Eldon had grown to need it the way some people need coffee. He was 58 years old, and he had been doing this for 30 years, 22 of those years on the bench. 8 before that in private practice, taking the cases nobody else wanted because nobody else wanted them, and somebody had to. He had come from a neighborhood where the courthouse was something you got taken to, not something you chose. His mother had cleaned the offices of 3 different attorneys before he was 14 years old, and he had spent his after-school hours in those offices reading whatever was on the shelves. Not because he had a plan, but because the books were there, and he had always been the kind of person who could not leave a room without understanding what was in it. He had paid for law school himself, every dollar. It had taken longer than it should have, and he had eaten things that did not deserve to be called meals. And he had studied in apartments where the heat didn't work, and studied on buses and studied at kitchen tables borrowed from people who were kind enough not to ask when he was leaving. None of that was on the wall. What was on the wall? His diploma framed by his mother the week it arrived. The glass of the frame replaced twice over the years because glass breaks, but the diploma stays. A photograph of his late wife Diana, taken at his swearing-in ceremony. She was laughing at something the photographer had said, and she was wearing a red dress that he had always thought was the exact color of joy. The plaque from the state bar he kept face down. He had never liked seeing his own name in print. It felt like someone else's. He had been presiding over a homicide trial for 3 weeks. The defendant was 19 years old. The victim had been 17. Both of them from neighborhoods not unlike the one Eldon had grown up in, where the distance between a life that goes one way and a life that goes another is sometimes as thin as a single afternoon and a single decision and a single person who was or wasn't there when it mattered. The weight of that trial was still in the room with him as he packed up his briefcase. He picked up the garment bag from the hook behind his door. The robe was inside it. He had taken it to the cleaner 4 days ago, Harrington's Dry Cleaning on Morrow Street, the same place he had taken it for 11 years, where the woman at the counter knew his name and always asked about his daughter. Next week, 3 new attorneys were being sworn into the Harlow County Bar. He had mentored 2 of them personally. Deja Whitmore, 27 years old, from the same neighborhood where Eldon had grown up, who had called him 6 years ago when she was a first-year student asking if he had any advice and had not stopped working since. And Calvin Forsyth, 29, whose father Eldon had represented in a civil rights case decades ago when Calvin was still in grade school. He was going to stand in front of that courtroom next Tuesday and watch those 2 people take an oath. He needed the robe to be clean for that. He laid it over his arm carefully the way you carry something that matters. Before he left, he did what he always did before leaving. He checked his desk. He straightened the stack of briefs for tomorrow's docket. He checked that the desk lamp was off, and he picked up the small spiral-bound notepad he kept in the top left drawer. A habit from law school from the years before he trusted his memory completely from a time when writing things down was the only way to make sure nothing got lost. He slid it into his breast pocket. He locked the chamber's door behind him. The heavy oak, the familiar click, the echo down the marble hallway, that specific echo that had been the sound of his day's ending for 22 years. He walked to the elevator. He pressed the button for the parking garage. He was thinking about Deja, about whether she would cry at the ceremony. He suspected she would not. She was not that kind of woman, but he thought she might come close, and he thought he might come close himself, and he had decided he was going to pretend to be looking at something on the ceiling if it came to that. He was 2 miles from his front door when the red and blue lights appeared in the mirror. The Mercedes was a 2019. Dark blue. He had bought it used 43,000 miles on it from a dealership in Kerrville, because the air conditioning worked without making that particular rattling sound his old car had made, and the leather seats did not hurt his lower back on long drives. It was not a flashy car. It was a comfortable car. There is a difference, though. Eldon had learned that not everyone could see it. The road home from the courthouse was 11 miles. He had driven it so many times that his hands knew the turns before his eyes did the left at the light on Commerce, the merge onto State Route 7, the long straight stretch past the hardware store and the closed-down movie theater and the gas station where the sign had been missing its second E for going on 4 years now. He knew where the road dipped and where the pavement was rough and where the deer sometimes came out of the tree line in October, and he knew all of this without thinking about it the way you know the layout of your own house in the dark. He played the classical station on the radio. Diana had set the preset. She had loved Chopin specifically. She said it sounded like what it felt like to think, and Eldon had never changed the station in the 7 years since she passed. He was aware that this was a choice. He made it every night. Oak Ridge Estates was the kind of neighborhood that announced itself before. You arrived, the streets widened slightly. The trees were older and taller. The street lights were evenly spaced and in working order. The houses sat back from the road on generous lots. The lawns maintained by services that came on weekday mornings. The driveways holding 2 cars, minimum, and sometimes 3. Eldon had bought his house there 11 years ago because the public school district was the best in the county and because the commute to the courthouse was 18 minutes without traffic. He had been the only black homeowner on his street for 9 of those 11 years. A family had moved in 2 years ago. The Okafor family, 5 houses down, the father a cardiologist, the mother running her own architecture firm, their 2 daughters excellent at soccer. Eldon brought them a pie the week they arrived. He had never been a man who made pies, but it had seemed like the right gesture, and he had learned from a YouTube video, and the result was acceptable. The road was slick from 3 hours of rain shining under the amber glow of the streetlights, the way wet asphalt does, black and mirrored and somehow deeper looking than dry road, as if the water has revealed something about the pavement that the daylight keeps hidden. He was at 35 miles per hour in a 35-mile-per-hour zone, which he knew because he always checked because 30 years of watching what happens to people in courtrooms had made him careful about the things that were within his control. Both headlights on, registration renewed 8 weeks ago, insurance current. The red and blue lights came out of nowhere the way they always do. Eldon's first instinct was practical. He checked the speedometer. He checked his mirrors. He checked his lights. The second instinct came right behind it, the older one, the one that had nothing to do with law school and everything to do with growing up black in America. A low, familiar weight settling in the chest. Not fear, not panic, something more measured than either, the knowledge of a particular kind of exposure. He activated his right turn signal. He brought the Mercedes to the shoulder smoothly, slowly, with the deliberate care of a man who wanted every action visible and unambiguous. He shifted into park. He turned off the engine. He rolled all 4 windows down, all 4, not just the driver's side, because windows down means hands visible, means no sudden movements, means giving the officers approaching his car every possible reason to feel safe, even when he was the one who had reason to be afraid. His hands went to the top of the steering wheel, fingers spread, palms down, where anyone could see them. He waited. That was when Gordon Hatch's silver SUV came around the bend from the opposite direction. Hatch was 63 years old, retired from a 30-year career in insurance. He lived 3 houses down from Eldon. They had waved at each other across lawns for 11 years. The previous 4th of July, Hatch had walked over with a 6-pack of beer, and they had stood in Eldon's driveway for 45 minutes talking about the Harlow County Road construction project and whether the new overpass was going to help or just move the traffic problem somewhere else. And it had been one of those perfectly ordinary conversations that you have with a neighbor and forget completely by the next morning. The SUV slowed. Eldon saw Hatch's face through the rain-streaked glass. He saw the moment Hatch registered the scene. The police cruiser, the Mercedes on the shoulder, the black man with his hands visible on the wheel. Eldon waited for the SUV to stop, for the window to roll down, for Hatch's voice calling out, "Hey, that's my neighbor. What's going on here?" Hatch's face registered something. His eyes found Eldon's through the glass. Then slowly, the SUV accelerated. The taillights disappeared around the bend. Eldon watched them go. He did not let himself feel it, not right now, not with a police officer about to reach his window and everything depending on how the next 20 minutes went. But he filed it away, the way he filed everything, carefully, precisely, in the part of his mind that kept the record. You can tell a great deal about a person from the way they walk when they think they have the advantage. Dale Croft walked to the Mercedes with the slow, deliberate pace of a man savoring something. He was in no hurry. Hurry suggests uncertainty, and Croft was not uncertain. He had made up his mind before he finished typing the plate into his system, before the results came back clean, before he had taken 3 steps from his cruiser door. He had seen the car first. Then he had seen the driver. And in the 1-second gap between those 2 observations, a story had assembled itself in his head that no amount of documentation was going to dislodge. He was 28 years old and had been on the force for 4 years, which was exactly long enough to have developed certainties without having enough experience to know that certainty is usually the most dangerous thing a person can carry. He had 4 commendations on his record, 2 for arrests, 1 for a traffic stop that had turned up a quantity of pills, 1 for helping an elderly woman during a flooding incident. He had also had 3 complaints filed against him in 4 years. All 3 had come from black motorists. All 3 had been administratively closed within 60 days. He was not aware that these facts were connected. His partner Paul Greer was 24 years old and 14 months into his career and had grown up in a town 50 miles north of Harlow County where the police force had 6 officers. And the most significant thing that happened in a given week was occasionally a noise complaint. He had trained under Croft for 8 of those 14 months, and he had over that period watched Croft do a version of this exact thing 11 times. He had said nothing 11 times. He was currently standing on the passenger side of the Mercedes, pointing his flashlight at the back seat, not because there was anything in the back seat that required examination, but because it gave him somewhere to look that was not at his training officer's face. Croft's flashlight found Eldon's face before Croft said a word. That is its own kind of statement. When a police officer uses a flashlight as the first thing he does at a traffic stop aimed directly at the driver's eyes held there not moved to see the interior, or the mirrors, or the license plate, but kept on the face, it is not a safety measure. It is a message. It says, I have the light, and you don't. I decide what gets seen. Eldon had been in rooms with that kind of power his entire adult life. He knew exactly what it was. He said good evening. He asked politely and correctly what the stop was for. He cited the relevant standard. And he watched the legal terminology land on Croft, the way it always landed on men like Croft, not as information, but as provocation, as a reminder that the person they had already decided was beneath them had somehow gotten hold of language that was supposed to belong to somebody else. The jaw setting, the shoulders squaring, the glance back at Greer, who had not looked up. When Croft's flashlight finally moved from Eldon's face to sweep the interior of the Mercedes, it paused on three things: the wood-grain dashboard, the premium leather seats, and the garment bag hanging from the rear hook. It lingered on the garment bag. Croft reached past the window frame. He should not have done that. He did not have consent. He did not have probable cause. He did not have anything except the certainty of a man who has never been held accountable for reaching where he should not reach. He unzipped the bag 2 inches. The flashlight found the fabric inside heavy black, the deep pleats of the robe catching the light in a way that distinguished it immediately from any ordinary garment to anyone who had ever seen one. Croft had seen one. He had stood in a courtroom 17 times in 4 years. He had looked at men and women wearing exactly this garment from a witness stand on 6 of those occasions. He did not make the connection, or he chose not to. The laugh, short, wet, self-satisfied. Some kind of costume back here. He said it over the roof of the car to Greer, who had gone very still on the passenger side. Greer's flashlight had stopped moving. His face, what Eldon could see of it in the side mirror, had the expression of a man who has just realized that the direction he has been walking in leads somewhere he does not want to go, and who has waited too long to change course. Eldon sat with his hands on the wheel and his windows down and the cold rain coming in across his left arm, and he thought, with the clarity of a man who had spent 30 years separating what was important from what was noise. Every word he just said is on that body camera. Every single word. He did not say this out loud. He said instead, carefully and clearly directly into the line of sight of the lens clipped to Croft's chest. "Officer, that garment belongs to me. I'd appreciate you not handling it." Croft ignored him, but the camera didn't. Dale Croft held the license under his flashlight for a long time. The name was there. The address was there. The photograph matched the man sitting 3 feet in front of him. The issue, date the expiration date, the state seal, the security stripe across the bottom, all of it was exactly as it should be, which is to say exactly as it would be on any legitimately issued state driver's license because it was a legitimately issued state driver's license. None of this moved Croft. He tapped the card against his knuckle once, twice. He held the registration up next. "Read it." Set it on the roof of the Mercedes. Then he said, "This is a fake." Eldon took a slow breath through his nose. He had heard this word used this way before, not often, but enough. Enough to know what it was doing here, what work it was being asked to perform. It was not a conclusion. It was a placeholder, a reason to continue. "That is a state-issued driver's license," Eldon said, his voice carrying the measured, unhurried weight that 30 years on the bench had built into it. "The registration matches the vehicle which is titled in my name. I have provided you with everything legally required." Croft made a sound in the back of his throat. Not a word. Something less formed than a word, but carrying the full meaning of, "I don't care what you've provided." "Where'd you get the car?" "Pruitt." He said the last name the way certain people say a name, not as a greeting, but as a diminishment stripped of its title, stripped of its weight. Or whatever your real name is." "My real name is on the license you're holding," Eldon said. "Funny how that works." Croft glanced again at Greer, who had returned to the passenger side of the vehicle and was leaning in with his flashlight, technically searching the back seat, practically just occupying himself. "Greer, plates come back to him." Greer straightened slightly. "Yeah," he said, not enthusiastically, not as confirmation of anything except that the system said what it said. "They come back clean." Croft absorbed this without any change of expression. "System's wrong," he said. Greer looked at the back of Croft's head. "Mitch, I said the system's wrong. This car was reported stolen. I've seen this before. They get the VIN filed off, run new plates, whole 9 yards. Eldon sat very still. He was listening to this the way he had listened to hundreds of witnesses on the stand construct testimony in real time, watching the architecture of it, the places where the story was load-bearing, and the places where it was decorative, understanding where it would hold under pressure and where it would not. He was also doing something else. His right hand, still visible on the steering wheel, drifted 2 inches to the right. Not down. Not toward anything that could be mistaken for a reach. Just 2 inches. Until his fingertips rested against the fabric of his suit jacket, against the slight rectangular outline of the notepad in his breast pocket. He noted the number on Croft's badge. He noted the time on the dashboard clock, 1:14 a.m. He noted the exact words Croft had just said. "System's wrong, reported stolen, seen this before." He did not write any of this down. He did not need to. He had spent 30 years trusting his memory in courtrooms. But the notepad was there, and the awareness of it was enough, the habit of documentation running like a background current beneath everything else. This was the first hidden agency moment, though no one watching from outside the car would have recognized it as one. It looked like nothing. A man's fingers resting against his own chest, but it was the beginning of the record. Croft was leaning in through the window again. The flashlight moved across the interior with renewed purpose, a man looking for something to find, which is a different and more dangerous activity than a man looking for something that exists. "What's in the back seat?" "My briefcase, a garment bag, nothing else." "What's in the garment bag?" Eldon kept his voice even. "A piece of clothing that belongs to me." "Yeah, you said that." Croft was already reaching for the rear door handle. "I'm going to need to take a look." "You don't have probable cause for a search of my vehicle," Eldon said. "The car is registered to me. The documents are valid. You have no basis." "I have you," Croft said, and opened the rear door. He went through the back seat with the thoroughness of a man who was certain he was about to find something. He checked under the seats. He lifted the edge of the floor mat. He moved Eldon's briefcase, opened it halfway, looked at the folders inside without reading them, and set it back. Then he unzipped the garment bag all the way. The robe came out into the rain. Croft held it up by its shoulder seams, letting it hang in the beam of the flashlight. The heavy black fabric caught the light and held it. The bell sleeves hung down. The pleats ran deep and deliberate. To anyone who had been in a courtroom, it was unmistakable. To Croft, in this moment, in this rain on this road where his mind was already fully occupied by the story he had decided was true, it was a black dress that didn't make any sense. "Choir gown," he called over to Greer. "Or is this more of a Halloween thing?" Greer said nothing. He was looking at the robe. Something in his face had shifted, not recognition, not yet, but the beginning of a question that he had not given himself permission to finish. Eldon Pruitt watched his robe being held in the rain. He watched the water darken the fabric at the shoulders. He watched Croft turn it once in the flashlight beam as if trying to figure out what it was. He watched Greer's face go through something in the background. And then he did the second thing. He turned his head not toward Croft, but toward the front of the car, toward the windshield, toward the angle where Croft's body camera would have the clearest sightline. And he said in a voice that was calm and clear and measured for that lens, not for the man holding his robe, "My name is Eldon T. Pruitt. The time is 1:16 a.m. That garment is my property and is being handled without my consent." 3 sentences. Not a protest. Not a plea. A statement of record delivered directly to the one witness that was going to matter later. Croft didn't look at him when he said it. He was already stuffing the robe back into the garment bag. "Stolen property," he said to no one in particular. "Going in as evidence. Step out of the vehicle." Eldon had known this was coming. You develop, after enough years of watching situations unfold from the bench, a feel for the direction of things, the way a current has a direction before it becomes visible, the way a verdict can be felt in a room before it is spoken. He had known, since the moment Croft refused to accept the registration, that this was not going to end with a warning and a wave. He narrated every movement. Left hand to the door handle, saying it aloud before he moved. Door open, saying it. Both feet on the wet asphalt, saying it. Standing hands raised to shoulder height, palms out, saying it. Every motion announced before it happened, every action visible before it was complete. The rain hit him the moment he was out of the car. It was the kind of cold rain that feels personal, that seems to fall specifically on you with a specific intention. And within 15 seconds, the shoulders of his suit were soaked through, and the water was running down the back of his neck and pooling at the collar of his shirt. He was 58 years old, standing in the rain at 1:17 in the morning on the shoulder of a road he had driven 11,000 times with his hands raised, wearing his good suit 2 miles from his front door. Croft moved fast, faster than necessary. He came around the front of the Mercedes with the energy of a man who has been waiting for this part, who finds in the physical exercise of an arrest something that the paperwork does not give him. And he said, hands on the roof, while he was still moving, and did not give Eldon time to comply before his hand was already on Eldon's shoulder. The shove was not dramatic. It was practiced. The flat of the palm against the shoulder, using the body's own momentum to direct it forward, and Eldon's hands found the roof of the Mercedes because he put them there, because he had made the decision in the car that he would not give Croft a single movement that could be written as resistance. His cheek was near the wet surface of the roof, and the metal was cold against the heel of his palm, and the rain fell on the back of his head. Croft's hands moved through his pockets. Jacket first, then trouser. Nothing. He reached through the open rear door and picked up the garment bag. He held the robe up again, still in the rain, and looked at it one more time with the expression of a man who cannot figure out why something exists. "What is this?" he said. Not quite a question. "That," Eldon said from his position against the roof of his own car, "is a judicial robe." Croft looked at it. Greer, from the other side of the vehicle, had gone completely still. He was looking at the robe. His flashlight was no longer moving. His face had the expression of a man who has just started to put something together that he is not sure he wants to finish putting together. "Judicial robe," Croft repeated. He said it the way you repeat something to dismiss it rather than accept it. He tossed the robe through the open rear door, and it landed across the back seat in a heap, the heavy black fabric pooling against the leather. "Sure it is. Probably stolen, too." Eldon said nothing. But then he did something. He turned his head slowly, carefully, with his hands still flat on the roof and his cheek still near the cold metal, and he positioned his face in the direction of the body camera on Croft's chest. And in a voice that was entirely calm and entirely clear, he said, "Officer Croft, badge number 2714. This is 1:19 a.m. I am being searched without consent. My judicial robe has been removed from its protective garment bag, handled in the rain, and thrown onto the back seat of my vehicle. I am stating this for the record." Croft's head turned sharply. "What did you just say?" "I stated facts," Eldon said. "For the record." There was a silence between them that lasted about 4 seconds. The rain filled it. The distant sound of a car on the highway filled it. Croft's breathing filled it. Then Croft said, "You think that's smart? You think talking at my camera is going to help you?" Eldon said nothing. "Turn around." He turned around. Slowly, hands visible, hands behind your back. He brought his hands behind his back. And here was the thing about Eldon Pruitt, the thing that Croft would never understand, and that no one watching from a precinct security camera would fully grasp. He was not submitting. He was not being broken. He was doing exactly what he had decided to do in the car, which was to give this man enough rope to build something that would last long past tonight. Every movement compliant, every movement documented. The handcuffs went on. The ratcheting of this mechanism, 2 clicks, the sound of metal finding metal, and Croft tightened them past the point of security, past the point of any legitimate officer's safety justification into the territory of deliberate pain. The metal bit into the skin. The circulation began to change immediately. Eldon felt the numbness starting at his wrists and working outward. He did not wince. He would not give Croft that. Greer appeared beside Croft. His face was pale in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. He opened the rear door of the cruiser. His eyes went to Eldon's wrists, the cuffs already doing visible damage, and then away. Croft's hand on the top of Eldon's head, pressing down as he lowered him into the back seat. The smell of the cruiser's interior hitting him immediately industrial cleaner, and something underneath it that the cleaner had never quite reached, something that spoke of the accumulated presence of people who had sat in this seat, in states of fear and desperation and rage. The plexiglass partitioned cold against his knee. The door slamming shut behind him with a weight and finality that is different from any other door. Through the rear window in the wet dark, he could see his Mercedes on the shoulder, his garment bag visible through the window, his robe inside it. Then, from the opposite direction, headlights, Gordon Hatch's silver SUV. It slowed again. It nearly stopped. And through the rain-streaked rear window of the cruiser, Eldon watched his neighbor's face appear behind his own window, registering the scene, registering the police car, registering the black man in handcuffs in the back seat. Their eyes met. Eldon waited. The SUV accelerated. He watched the taillights until they were gone. He leaned his head back against the partition and closed his eyes and breathed. He was not going to let that feeling take up space right now. He would give it space later. Right now, he had work to do. Outside, he could hear Croft and Greer talking through the glass. Greer's voice. The plates came back clean, Mitch. There's no probable cause. The guy isn't acting like Croft's voice cutting him off, grow up Tyler. I've seen this 100 times. Nice suit, fancy car, they think it makes them untouchable. He printed that ID himself. We get him in the box, he'll talk. Eldon listened to every word. He noted every word. The ride to the Harlow County Precinct took 11 minutes. Eldon counted them. He had nothing else to do with his hands. The dashboard clock was visible through the plexiglass partition if he leaned slightly to his right, and he watched the minutes change with the patience of a man who has spent decades waiting for moments to arrive, waiting for juries to return, waiting for witnesses to reach the part of their testimony where the truth finally sat down, and stayed waiting for people to say the thing they had been trying not to say. Waiting had never frightened him. Waiting was a form of attention. His wrists hurt. The numbness had given way to something sharper, a specific located pain that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. He could feel the metal of the cuffs against what he was fairly certain was broken skin. His wetsuit clung to him in the particular miserable way that soaked wool clings heavy and cold and refusing to give. His shoes were ruined. He noted this with the same neutrality he noted everything else. In the front seat, Croft drove with one hand on the wheel and the confident ease of a man who had done his job and done it well, who was already composing in his head the version of the night he was going to write into the report, the one where he had acted on reasonable suspicion, followed procedure, made a clean arrest. He adjusted the rearview mirror once and caught Eldon's eyes in the reflection. "Comfortable back there?" Eldon looked back at him. "I'm exactly where I need to be, Officer Croft," he said. "Drive." Croft looked back at the road. Something in him had shifted slightly at those words, not alarm, not yet just a tiny involuntary hesitation, the kind your body makes when it hears something that doesn't fit the expected shape of a sentence. But it passed. He drove. Greer had said nothing since the highway. He sat with his arms crossed and his eyes on the road, and the look of a man having a very long, very quiet argument with himself. Eldon turned his attention back to the partition. He thought about the 3 attorneys being sworn in next week. He thought about Deja Whitmore, who had called him from a parking lot 6 years ago in tears after receiving a rejection letter from a firm she had wanted, and he had told her that some doors being closed was the system telling you that you were supposed to be somewhere better. And he had believed it when he said it, and she had come to believe it too, and now she was going to stand in his courtroom and take an oath to uphold the law. He thought about what it would mean to have this be in the record. Not just the arrest, not just the charges, but the whole shape of it, the stop, the search, the robe called a costume, the cuffs tightened beyond any safety rationale the neighbor who drove past. He thought about the people who sat in the back of police cars who didn't have 30 years of legal knowledge and a judicial title waiting to be revealed. The ones who came to the same precinct in these same handcuffs who nobody was going to call your honor at the booking desk. The ones who mattered more if you were being honest about it. The ones who the whole point of any of this was supposed to be for. He had made his decision on the shoulder of Oak Ridge Road, but this was when it solidified completely. Not just the decision not to reveal himself. The decision about what to do afterward. The decision about the shape of the accountability he was going to pursue. He was going to let this go all the way to the bottom. Every lie would be in the report. Every lie would be recorded. Every overreach would be documented by the same system that Croft believed was going to protect him. And then, the precinct building appeared through the rain-streaked rear window. A single-story, beige concrete, a parking lot lit by security lights that gave everything a slightly jaundiced color. The sign above the main entrance read Harlow County Sheriff's Department District 12. Croft pulled into a space near the entrance. He killed the engine. He sat for a moment. Then he adjusted the mirror again and looked at Eldon one more time. Eldon looked back. His face was still. His eyes were still. His hands behind his back were numb from the wrists down, but his face was still. Croft got out. He came around to the rear door. He opened it and reached in. And Eldon Pruitt stepped out of a police car and walked into the Harlow County Sheriff's Department the same way he had walked into every room for 30 years. Spine straight, head level, chin up. He did not look like a man who had been arrested. He looked like a man who had been waiting for this building to come to him. The bullpen at 1:28 in the morning had the specific quality of a place that never fully sleeps, but that dreams a little in the overnight hours. The fluorescent lights were on. They were always on in that flat, merciless way of institutional lighting that erases shadows and ages faces and makes everyone look slightly unwell. The linoleum was the color of a decision made in the 1980s and never revisited. The air held the layered geology of 22 years of coffee brewing tobacco sneaked in doorways, cleaning products applied without sufficient ventilation, and the accumulated human presence of people who were brought here on the worst nights of their lives. Croft marched Eldon through the bullpen by the chain of his handcuffs. He did this with the kind of energy that comes from a man who believes he is performing well. His chest was forward. His grip on the chain was loose and practiced the way you carry something you're proud of. The walk from the double doors to the booking desk was maybe 30 feet, and Croft covered it like a man crossing a stage. The skeleton crew of the overnight shift looked up, a dispatcher behind glass, two detectives at adjacent desks who had been comparing notes on a case file and who both went still, a civilian records clerk who had been eating a sandwich and who set it down, a uniformed officer at a filing cabinet who stopped filing. They all looked at Eldon, and Eldon looked back at each of them in turn calmly, and without hurry the way you look around a room when you're trying to understand its layout. He noted the exits. He noted the security camera above the booking desk, its red light steady. He noted the civilian clerk who was watching him with an expression not of contempt, but of something closer to uncertainty. The look of someone who is not sure what they're seeing, and is waiting for more information before deciding. Behind the booking desk sat Sergeant Dennis Waverly. Waverly was 52 years old and had been on the force for 22 years, which meant he had spent 2 decades processing the full spectrum of human capacity for getting themselves into bad situations. He had developed over that time the particular low-frequency perception of a man who has seen enough patterns to recognize when something doesn't fit one. He barely looked up when the double doors opened. He was finishing a sentence in a report, clicking through his computer, the familiar rhythm of the overnight shift. Then Croft came through with his prisoner, and Waverly looked up. He looked at Eldon from the top of his silver head to the bottom of his soaked, ruined shoes. He took in the suit. The cut of it even soaked through. The way the man wore it even soaked through, even with his hands behind his back. The posture. The hands, he could already see the discoloration at the wrists from across the desk, which meant those cuffs were on too tight, which was already a problem, and the problem was only going to get larger depending on what the next 60 seconds revealed. He looked at the wet garment bag that Greer was carrying, which Greer was holding at arm's length, slightly away from his body in the posture of a man carrying something that makes him uncomfortable. He looked at Eldon's face. Eldon looked back at him. Something passed between them. Not recognition, Waverly had never met this man. But the instinct of a man who has processed thousands of people, the low hum of experience saying this is wrong. Croft launched into his summary. Grand theft auto, fraudulent identification, resisting arrest, possession of stolen property. He said it with the compressed efficiency of a man who had said this particular sentence, or a version of it, many times before, and who expected the booking sergeant to receive it the way the booking sergeant always received it, which was to say without much question. Waverly took the driver's license from Croft. He read it. He looked at the name. He looked at the address. He looked at the photograph. He looked at Eldon. Eldon said nothing. He waited. His hands were behind his back and the pain in his wrists was significant, and his wetsuit was cold against his skin, and he had been standing in the rain and riding in a police cruiser for the better part of an hour, and he felt all of this and none of it touched his face. And he was thinking in the particular clear way that extreme circumstances sometimes produce about something one of his law professors had said to him in his second year. A man named Ezra Thornton, who had grown up in Alabama and who had been one of 6 black attorneys in the state in the 1970s, and who had said to Eldon over coffee one afternoon, "The law is a long game, son. The people who win it are the ones who understand they're playing chess while everyone else thinks it's checkers." Croft thought this was over. He was at his workstation now, already pulling up the incident report template, already typing. The narrative was assembling itself on the screen with the practiced ease of a man who had written variations of this story before. Officer observed suspicious vehicle initiated. Stop suspect became uncooperative. Documents appeared inconsistent, each phrase smooth and institutional and designed to survive internal review. Waverly was still looking at the license. He picked up the registration. He set both documents on his desk and pulled up his booking system. He looked at Eldon one more time, and Eldon held his gaze, and Waverly said, "I'm going to need your fingerprints." "Of course," Eldon said. He said it pleasantly, almost warmly. The way you say of course when the thing being asked of you is the exact thing you have been waiting to be asked. He stepped to the fingerprint scanner. He placed his right thumb on the glass. The machine hummed. The AFIS scanner took each print with the patient indifference of a machine that had no opinion about anything, and simply recorded what it received. Right thumb, right index, left thumb, left index, 4 fingers flat. Eldon cooperated with the precision of a man who had explained this exact procedure to juries more times than he could count the automated fingerprint identification system. Ladies and gentlemen, links to the federal NCIC database, and to the state's judicial and law enforcement records, and it does not make mistakes. He had said those words in his courtroom. He had said them as the factual foundation of evidence he was allowing into the record. He had relied on the accuracy of this system to establish the truth of things. The truth of things. He placed his 4 fingers flat and waited. On the other side of the booking desk at his workstation, Dale Croft was typing. The incident report was taking shape. Eldon could not see the screen, but he could hear the rhythm of the keys' confident fast, the typing of a man who knew what he wanted to say. Every now and then, Croft paused presumably to recall a specific detail or to find the right phrasing for something, and then the typing resumed. Greer had put the garment bag on the counter. He was standing 3 feet from it with his arms crossed, looking at the wall just above the bag, not at the bag itself. He had been in approximately this posture since the highway. He looked like a man trying very hard not to be present in a room that he was physically present in. The civilian records clerk had finished her sandwich and was now quietly pretending to do something with a set of folders. The 2 detectives had not returned to their case file. The dispatcher was watching through the glass partition with the look of someone trying to decide whether what they were watching was interesting or alarming. Dennis Waverly sat behind his desk with his eyes on his computer screen and his face arranged in the expression of a man waiting for a system to return a result. The loading bar moved across the bottom of the screen. The bullpen was not loud. It was the kind of quiet that isn't the absence of noise so much as the suspension of it, as if the building itself had taken a breath and was holding it. The bar reached 100%. The system chimed. A single, soft note. Waverly leaned toward the screen. He blinked. He leaned closer. He rubbed his left eye with the back of his hand. He read the screen again. The text was in green, the green that the AFIS system used to indicate a confirmed match, a clean return, a verified identity. It read in the particular clinical formatting of government database output, AFIS/NCIC database. Match confirmed. Name, Pruitt Eldon T. Date of birth, March 7, 1966. Criminal history. 0 results. Record clear. Employment status, state government official active. Security clearance judicial tier 1, high. Title, Superior Court Judge, 5th Judicial District, Harlow County. Alert, verified judicial officer. Do not detain without warrant. Waverly's face went through several things in the space of about 2 seconds. First, confusion. Because the name on the screen was a name he knew not personally, not from a social encounter, but from 22 years of working in a courthouse system where a certain handful of names occupied a particular gravitational position. Judge Eldon Pruitt was a name you heard in the way you heard the name of a weather pattern that had shaped everything around it for decades. Second, the calculation. The database result. The charge sheet Croft had given him. The soaking wet man with the bruised wrist standing 3 feet away. The garment bag on the counter. The heavy black fabric visible through the partially unzipped bag. Third, the understanding of what was in that bag. Waverly looked at the garment bag. He looked at the bell sleeves visible through the opening. He looked at the deep pleats. He looked at the weight of the fabric, the way it hung, the way it had been made. He had stood in the 5th District Courthouse 40 or 50 times over his career. He had watched men and women in exactly this garment occupy exactly the position that the man in front of him occupied every working day. He felt physically ill. "Mitch," he said. His voice came out lower than he intended. Quieter. The voice of a man who has just found himself standing at the edge of something and is trying to gauge the depth. Croft kept typing. Finishing the narrative, Sarge. Adding the resisting charge guy was uncooperative the whole way. Tried to... Mitch. Louder. Stop typing. The keys stopped. Croft looked up. He took in Waverly's face. The certainty he had been carrying since Oak Ridge Road flickered just a flicker, the way a light flickers in a building before it goes out entirely. What? Waverly did not answer him. He was already out from behind the desk, moving with a haste that was unusual for a man who had spent 2 decades developing the measured pace of someone who had seen everything. He was reaching for his key ring. He was moving toward Eldon. He dropped the keys once. The sound of metal on linoleum rang out in the quiet of the bullpen. He picked them up without pausing, barely broke stride. "Your Honor," Waverly said, and his voice cracked on the second word, not with emotion exactly, but with the specific strain of a man who has just realized the scope of something and is trying to speak clearly while also processing it. "Your Honor, sir, I am so deeply sorry. I am removing these right now." The key found a lock on the left cuff. The metal fell away. Eldon brought his arms forward slowly because his wrists had been in those cuffs for going on 40 minutes, and the circulation was returning with a pain that ran from his palms to his elbows, and he rubbed the indentations carefully, his face entirely still. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He did not say, "I told you so," or "Do you see now?" or any of the words that the moment might have permitted. He simply stood there in the center of the room in his wet, ruined suit with his arms in front of him and his wrists marked red and purple, and he looked at Dennis Waverly with an expression that was not warm and not cold, but simply present, fully, completely present in the way that a person is present when they have been waiting for a room to understand something and the room has finally understood it. Croft was on his feet. The mocking smile, the one he had been wearing since Oak Ridge Road, the one that had survived the drive and the booking desk and the fingerprints, it lasted about 2 more seconds after Waverly said, "Your Honor." Then it was gone. Reynolds Dale Croft stood at his workstation and looked at the scene in front of him and tried to assemble it into something that made sense. The sergeant was at the center of the room, keys in hand, removing cuffs from a prisoner. Using the words, "Your Honor." The detectives who had been at their desks were both standing now. The civilian clerk had stopped pretending to look at folders. Greer was on the far side of the counter, very still with an expression that Croft could not read. And the man who had been his prisoner was standing in the middle of the bullpen with his arms free, rubbing his wrists, looking at absolutely nothing and everything at the same time. Croft took a step toward Waverly. "What is this?" His voice came out wrong, too loud. The wrong timbre for the room. The voice of a man who had just lost the conversational ground he thought he was standing on. "Sarge, what are you doing?" Waverly did not look at him. He was examining Eldon's wrists, turning them over carefully, looking at the damage with the expression of a man performing a medical assessment he was not trained for but was performing anyway because he needed to know the extent of it. "Get your hands off that report," Waverly said without looking up. Croft looked at his workstation. The incident report was still on the screen, the cursor blinking at the end of the last sentence he had typed. "I was almost done." "Don't touch it again," Waverly said. "Don't touch anything on that desk." Silence. Croft looked from Waverly to Eldon to Greer. Greer was not looking at him. Greer was looking at the garment bag on the counter. Then Greer looked at Eldon. Then Greer looked at the floor. Something was happening. Croft could feel the shape of it without understanding the content. The room had changed in some way that he had not caused and could not control, and that fact alone was enough to send a low current of something unfamiliar moving through him. "Sarge?" His voice quieter now. "What did you find?" Waverly finally looked at him. It was a long look, not angry. Waverly did not lead with anger. It was not the way he was built, but carrying something heavier than anger, something that had the weight of a conclusion in it. "Go get Captain Fallon," Waverly said to the uniformed officer by the filing cabinet. "Tell him to come down now." The officer left immediately. Croft stayed where he was. He looked at the man standing in the center of the room, the man he had arrested, the man he had cuffed too tight, the man whose garment bag he had unzipped on the side of a highway in the rain, and whose property he had held up and called a costume. He looked at the garment bag on the counter and looked at the fabric visible through the opening. He had been in courtrooms. He had testified 17 times in 4 years. He had sat in the witness box and answered questions and looked at the bench and at the man or woman sitting behind it in exactly that garment, that specific black garment, with those specific pleats and those specific sleeves, and he had called it the right things, on those occasions, Your Honor, and the court, and yes, Judge, because it had been expected, and because it was the right thing to say. He looked at the fabric. He looked at the man. His face went through something. The certainty, that hard structural certainty that had carried him from the moment the Mercedes pulled onto the shoulder of Oak Ridge Road all the way to this room, did not collapse all at once. It lost pieces, one piece at a time. The footsteps on the stairs were Captain Roy Fallon's. Fallon was 55 years old, built like a former Marine that he was with close-cropped gray hair and the slightly weathered face of a man who had spent 3 decades in rooms where things went wrong and was never in 30 years seen to panic. He came down the stairs and into the bullpen holding a ceramic mug of tea. His eyes moved the way, trained eyes moved, taking in the room in one sweep, registering Waverly's posture, Greer's position, the detectives on their feet, the garment bag on the counter, and the man in the center of the room. Fallon stopped. The mug of tea hit the floor. It shattered. The tea spread across the linoleum in a dark spreading shape. Fallon did not look at it. He did not look at anything except Eldon. Because Roy Fallon had testified in Eldon Pruitt's courtroom 3 times in the past 6 years. He had sat in the witness box and answered questions in that careful, institutional way that career law enforcement men answer judicial questions. He had looked at the bench. He had looked at the man behind it. He knew this face. "Judge Pruitt," Fallon said. His voice was hollow in the way of a voice that has been emptied out by what it is being asked to say. The bullpen was completely, absolutely silent. The fluorescent lights hummed. The rain hit the barred windows. Somewhere in the building a door closed. These were the only sounds. And then, for the first time since Croft's flashlight found his face on Oak Ridge Road, Eldon Pruitt spoke with the full, unmodulated authority of who he was. Not loud, not theatrical, not the voice of a man making a speech. The voice of the court. "Captain Fallon," he said, "it is a profoundly disappointing evening." He looked then at Croft. Croft was still standing at his workstation. The mocking smile was entirely gone. What had replaced it was something that Eldon had watched happen to other people from the bench, the slow, agonizing replacement of certainty with its opposite. The face of a man understanding that the ground he has been walking on was not ground at all. "You told me I would regret opening my mouth," Eldon said to him, quiet, measured. Each word placed with the precision of a man who has learned that the worst verdicts are delivered in the quietest voices. "You told me you were sick of hearing it." He let the silence hold for one beat. "I assure you, for every deposition, every hearing, every day of litigation that follows this night, my voice is going to be the last thing you hear before the judgment comes down." What happened in the next 30 minutes in the Harlow County Sheriff's Department District 12 had the quality of a demolition conducted by someone who knew exactly where the load-bearing walls were. Captain Fallon took command of the room, the way career officers take command, not dramatically, not with a speech, but with a series of rapid, specific instructions delivered in a voice that left no space for interpretation. The body camera footage secured. The dash camera footage secured. Copies to Internal Affairs and to the District Attorney's Office immediately, not tomorrow, now. The incident report on Croft's screen, not touched, not altered, preserved exactly as it was, because an unfinished falsified police report with a timestamp that would later be matched frame by frame against body camera footage was not evidence to be managed, it was evidence to be kept. Croft's union representative had been called. He was not yet here. In the meantime, Fallon had moved Croft to a corner of the bullpen with the controlled efficiency of a man removing a hazard from an active space, and Croft sat in a hard plastic chair with his hands on his knees and his face doing the private work of a man whose world has just reconfigured itself into something he does not recognize. Greer came to Fallon. He did not wait to be called. He came of his own volition, which was significant, and Fallon registered it as significant, and Greer told him everything. The stop, the plates coming back clean, the documents that were real, the robe, the cuffs, the fact that Greer had known from the moment the AFIS results came back clean after the initial plate run that there was no probable cause. The fact that he had said so. The fact that Croft had dismissed him. The fact that Greer had then said nothing else. His voice broke on that last part. Not from grief, from the specific cost of understanding something about yourself that you have been avoiding. Fallon told him to write it all down. Every word, every moment, tonight. Greer sat down at a desk and picked up a pen and began. Detective Nora Voss had arrived at the precinct 2 hours earlier for a matter entirely unrelated to this one, a cold case review that she had scheduled with the overnight sergeant. She had been in a side office when Croft brought Eldon through the double doors. She had come to the doorway of the side office and watched. She had stood there for 4 minutes without speaking or moving. When Waverly removed the handcuffs and said, "Your Honor," she had already taken out her phone. By the time Fallon came down the stairs, she had made 2 calls. Eldon moved through the room with the unhurried intention of a man who knows what needs to happen next and is prepared to ensure that it happens. He asked for a photographer. He asked for a medical examination of his wrists, not for the records he said, but because the injuries were evidence, and evidence needed to be properly documented. He named the charges that the night's events would support unlawful stop without probable cause, illegal search, without consent, excessive force in the application of restraints, filing a false police report. He named them not as accusations but as legal categories, the way you name things in a filing, the way you organize facts into the shape that the law will receive them. The precinct photographer arrived. She was a young civilian employee who had been called in from home on short notice and who arrived with her equipment bag and a face that suggested she had been told something on the phone, but not everything. Fallon walked her through the assignment. She spent 15 minutes documenting Eldon's wrists, the deep grooves, the broken skin at the points of maximum pressure, the bruising that had already spread from the wrists to the backs of both hands. The flash of her camera in the quiet room was the loudest sound in the building. Fallon, when the photography was complete, cleared his throat and told Eldon that his vehicle would be brought from the impound lot to the front of the building immediately and that Fallon himself would be honored to drive him home. Eldon looked at him. "I was brought to this building as a criminal suspect," he said. "I will not leave it as a VIP. I've arranged my own transportation." He walked to the counter. He picked up the garment bag. He held it carefully, cradling it really the way you hold something that represents more than the thing itself, the way you carry something back from a place it should never have been. He turned back to the room one final time. Greer was at a desk head down, writing, not looking up. Croft was in his plastic chair. His face was buried in his hands. He was not crying. He was somewhere past crying in the particular territory that comes after the moment when you understand that the thing you thought was going to be okay is not going to be okay, and that the shape of the next years of your life has just changed permanently, and that the change is the direct product of your own choices. Eldon stood in front of him for a moment. Croft did not look up. The fundamental flaw. Eldon said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, was not that you misjudged me. It was that you believed judgment was yours to make in the first place. You saw a man in a car and you decided what he was before you looked at a single piece of evidence. The law you swore to uphold does not work that way. It never worked that way. You just never had to reckon with it until tonight. He paused. The badge doesn't grant you superiority over the citizens you are sworn to protect. It makes you responsible to them. That is an enormous difference, Mr. Croft. You will have considerable time to sit with it. He turned and walked to the double doors. He pushed them open and stepped back out into the rain. He stood on the wet pavement outside the Harlow County Sheriff's Department District 12, and he breathed the cold night air, and he held his garment bag against his chest, and he stood there for exactly 1 moment before the private car he had arranged arrived at the curb. He got in. He did not look back at the building. 3 days after the incident, a 47-page complaint was filed in federal court. It was filed at 9:02 in the morning, which was the first available moment after the clerk's office opened, which was when Eldon Pruitt arrived at the courthouse. Not in the private entrance he used as a sitting judge, but through the public entrance, through the metal detectors, through the lobby where the public cases were posted on the bulletin board, and the morning light came in through the tall windows and fell on the marble floor in the long rectangles. He filed it himself. The plaintiff, Eldon T. Pruitt, citizen. Not Judge Pruitt, not Your Honor. Citizen. The defendant's Officer Dale Croft. The Harlow County Sheriff's Department. The county municipality. The complaint did not ask for money. This landed in the legal community like a stone dropped into a room that had expected something else. The complaint was 47 pages of meticulous, precise legal argument, citing specific violations, naming specific statutes, attaching the AFIS results. The body camera timestamps. Greer's written statement, the medical documentation of the wrist injuries. It was the work of a man who had been preparing this filing not in the 3 days since the incident, but in the 11 minutes he had spent in the back of a police cruiser on the way to the precinct, and in the 38 minutes he had spent in the precinct before walking out into the rain, and in every year of his career, during which he had watched people come before his bench carrying the particular kind of damage that this particular kind of night produces. He did not ask for compensatory damages. His statement to the court was brief, and it was read the following morning in 2 newspapers and a local television broadcast, and by approximately 6,000 people on a social media platform that Eldon did not personally use, but that his daughter had showed him and explained. Any settlement paid by this county would come from the taxes of the same citizens I serve. I don't want their money. I want them to be safer. It was 11 words that reordered the conversation about what the lawsuit was and what it was for. It was also quietly the most complete description of the man Eldon Pruitt had spent 30 years trying to be. Inside the sheriff's department, the events of that night had begun their slow, precise unfolding. The body camera footage was reviewed by Internal Affairs the morning after the incident. It was reviewed again the afternoon after that. Detective Nora Voss, who was leading the investigation with the thoroughness of a person who understands that thoroughness is the only thing standing between an honest accounting and a managed retreat, had watched the full 47 minutes of combined footage cam and body cam 4 times by the end of the first week. What she found was worse than a single bad night. The 3 prior complaints against Dale Croft, all filed by black motorists, all from the Oak Ridge Estates corridor, all administratively closed within 60 days of filing, had been sitting in a folder in a filing cabinet in the Internal Affairs Division for 2 years. The folder was thin. The investigation in each case had been brief. The conclusions had been reached with the efficient speed of an institution that had not wanted to reach any other conclusion. Voss pulled all 3 files. She read them. She noted the names of the complainants. She noted the specific nature of each complaint. She noted that 2 of the 3 complainants had stopped at the administrative level and pursued nothing further, possibly because the administrative level had cost them the months of time and psychic energy that it costs to report something to the same institution that wronged you and wait to see if the institution will hold itself responsible. The 3rd complainant, a woman named Beverly Oates, 44 years old, who had been stopped in the same corridor on a Tuesday evening and told by Croft that her insurance documentation appeared suspicious, had filed a lawsuit. It had been settled privately 18 months ago. The terms were confidential. Beverly Oates had signed a non-disclosure agreement. Voss noted this too. Greer's written statement arrived on Voss's desk on the morning of day 2. It was 4 pages handwritten in the careful block print of a man who was trying to be absolutely precise and who understood that precision was the only form of integrity available to him at this point. He described the stop, the absence of probable cause, the plates coming back clean, the registration and the license, the robe and the handcuffing, his own silence. He wrote, "I knew from the beginning that the stop was not justified. I did not say so clearly enough. I did not intervene when intervention was required. I knew this was wrong. I am deeply sorry that my knowing and not acting fully means something terrible about the kind of officer I've allowed myself to become. I intend to be a different one going forward. I understand that intending it doesn't make up for what happened." It was not a legal document. It was a confession in the old sense of the word, a reckoning with one's own capacity for failure. Voss read it twice. She filed it as Exhibit B. The formal charges against Croft were filed by the State Attorney General's office 12 days after the incident, not by the county. The county's involvement in that decision was limited to receiving the notification. The charges: unlawful detention in violation of the 4th Amendment of the United States Constitution, excessive force, filing a false police report, abuse of authority under color of law. 4 charges, federal charges. Someone inside the Harlow County Sheriff's Department District 12 sent the body camera footage to a local television news producer on a Thursday evening 9 days after the incident. It was not Greer. It was not Waverly. Voss's investigation never determined with certainty who it was. The footage arrived via a personal email account that had been created specifically for the purpose and that was subsequently deleted. Whoever sent it understood what they were sending. The clip the news station received was 47 seconds long. It had been trimmed from the full footage with care not to deceive but to show. It began with Croft unzipping the garment bag on the side of Oak Ridge Road. It showed the robe coming out into the rain. It showed Croft holding it up in the flashlight beam, and it captured in the audio the word costume. It showed Eldon against the roof of his own car, hands flat on the wet metal rein, running down the back of his neck. It showed the handcuffing. It showed Eldon's spine straight level, absolutely unbending through all of it. And it showed Greer, looking at his boots. The clip was broadcast on the 11 o'clock news on Thursday. By Friday morning, it had been seen by 400,000 people. By Saturday morning, 2.7 million. It was not the violence that undid people. Violence, by the cold arithmetic of internet consumption, was not new. People had learned to brace for it, to process it, to move past it with the numb deficiency that long exposure produces. What undid people was the robe. The image of a man's life work, 30 years of courtrooms and oath-takings and the patient-grinding daily application of justice held up in the rain by someone who called it a costume. There was something in that image that statistics couldn't carry, that a press release couldn't carry, that even the most precise legal filing couldn't carry. It was the image of dignity being mocked by someone who didn't understand what dignity was, and it reached people in a place below argument, below political affiliation, below the categories by which people generally sort information. People who had never thought about judicial robes thought about them now. People who had never thought about what it cost a human being to build a life of service and bring it carefully in a garment bag through a building at midnight, they thought about it now. The community response was not a riot. It was in some ways more powerful than a riot because a riot can be managed, and its meaning can be argued, and its participants can be characterized in ways that shift the attention from the thing that caused it. What happened outside the Harlow County District 12 Precinct building on the Saturday morning after the footage broke was not arguable. A crowd gathered. They came in the morning cold, men and women, many of them elderly. Many of them in church clothes as if they had come from or were going to a service, and some of them had. They brought nothing. They held nothing. They stood on the sidewalk across from the building in the gray morning light, and they were quiet, and they did not leave. By noon, there were 300 people. By 2 in the afternoon, 450. Reverend Thomas Albright was among them. He arrived mid-morning to find the crowd already there. He had not organized it and had not been asked to speak, and he did not speak. He stood in the third row from the front, and he watched the building, and he thought about Eldon Pruitt's mother who had sat in the third pew from the front of his church for 27 years, and who had told him once after a service in which he had preached on perseverance that she had a son who was going to be one of the ones who made things right. She had said it with the quiet certainty of a woman who was not predicting the future, but describing it. Inside the sheriff's department, the week had moved with the specific quality of collapse, not dramatic, not sudden, but progressive. Each piece connecting to the next, with the mechanical inevitability of a structure that has been compromised at its foundation. The sheriff, an elected official who had publicly praised Croft twice in the preceding 2 years, once in a department newsletter and once at a community meeting where Croft had been cited for his exemplary arrest record, did not hold a press conference. He did not issue a public statement beyond the single departmental paragraph that his communications officer released on Friday morning, which acknowledged that an investigation was ongoing and that the department was committed to accountability. He did not appear publicly for 12 weeks. The Beverly Oats settlement was discovered by a reporter from the state's largest newspaper who had received a tip. Another anonymous tip. Another carefully chosen recipient, and who spent 4 days verifying it before publishing a story that ran on the front page of the Sunday edition under the headline, "This is not the first time." The story ran with a photograph of Oates who had agreed to be photographed on the condition that the terms of the settlement were reported accurately, and who said in her brief statement to the reporter, "I signed that paper because I was tired and I thought it was over. I didn't know it wasn't over. I didn't know there would be more people after me. If I had known, I would not have signed it." The non-disclosure agreement that Oates had signed contained a clause releasing the county from further liability. Voss's investigation flagged this clause as a possible element of a pattern of institutional protection of a problem that the institution had reason to know existed and chose not to address. Fallon provided a full accounting. Every document Voss requested, Fallon produced. Every question she asked, Fallon answered. He did not manage the conversation or attempt to steer it. He was by all observable evidence a man who had decided that the only way through this was straight through it. He was also a man who, in the quiet of his own office at the end of the second week, sat for a long time with the knowledge that the prior complaints had been closed on his watch, that the pattern had existed under his command, and that he had not seen it. He wrote Eldon Pruitt a letter. He sent it through the federal court filing system as part of the official record because he understood that a private apology to a man who had deliberately chosen a public reckoning was not the right gesture. The letter was 2 pages. It acknowledged every specific failure of oversight. It asked for nothing. It promised nothing that was within Fallon's power to promise. It said, at its close, I should have known. That is the truth of it. Eldon read the letter at his desk. He read it twice. He set it in the left-hand drawer under the notepad. Dale Croft turned in his badge on a Tuesday afternoon at 3:15 p.m. There were no cameras present. The union representative was there. A departmental human resources officer was there. Fallon was there. Croft himself. He placed the badge on the desk in the HR office, not dramatically, not with a speech, not with anything that could be described later as a gesture. He set it down on the wood surface the way you set down something you have been carrying for a long time and can no longer justify carrying. The badge was taken into custody as evidence. The federal charges were pending. The badge would be entered into the record with the rest. His personal items were in a cardboard box that he had packed himself under supervision the previous afternoon. The box contained a photograph from his first day on the force, a coffee mug, a training manual, and a small framed commendation from the Sheriff's Department newsletter. The photograph was of Croft in his new uniform standing in front of the precinct. He was 24 years old in the photograph. He was smiling the smile of a person who believes that the thing they are beginning is entirely good. He carried the box out of the building at 3:22 p.m. He did not look at the booking desk as he passed it. He did not look at anything on his way out. His pension was subject to forfeiture proceedings under state law governing criminal convictions of law enforcement officers. The proceedings had been initiated. The outcome was pending the resolution of the federal criminal charges. The unfinished incident report, the one he had been typing at his workstation when Waverly called him away, the one that Fallon had ordered preserved exactly as it was, had been time-stamped at 1:31 a.m. The body camera footage showed at 1:31 a.m. Croft walking through the double doors of the precinct with Eldon in handcuffs. The report's narrative, which described a cooperative detainee and a straightforward probable cause stop, had been written in the 18 minutes between Croft sitting down at his desk and Waverly ordering him away. 18 minutes. A man constructing a false account of events that were still unfolding in the same room. Exhibit A. The unfinished report was entered into the federal record as Exhibit A because the most complete evidence of intent that Voss found in the entire investigation was the document that Croft had been building in real time while the man he had arrested stood at a fingerprint scanner 15 feet away. The state attorney general's office described it in the formal charging document as contemporaneous fabrication of false official records demonstrating premeditated intent to conceal unlawful conduct. Greer's case was handled separately. His 30-day suspension without pay was announced publicly because Fallon had decided, and Voss had concurred, that the handling of Greer's role needed to be part of the public record in a way that the closed administrative proceedings of the past had never been. The announcement named the specific failure to intervene in witnessed unlawful police conduct. Not failure to speak loudly enough, not insufficient action, failure to intervene. The language was chosen carefully because the language mattered. Greer accepted the suspension without appeal. His statement to the press was 3 sentences. What happened that night was wrong. I knew it was wrong. I did not act with the courage the situation required, and I am accountable for that failure. He returned to the force after his suspension. He was reassigned at his own request to a different district. The consent decree that Eldon's lawsuit ultimately produced negotiated over 4 months and signed by the county, the sheriff's department, and a federal mediator did not run to dozens of pages of procedural requirements. Eldon had been insistent on this. He had told his attorney, "I am not interested in creating a bureaucratic monument to this night. I am interested in one thing, which is that the next person who gets stopped on Oak Ridge Road is treated like a person." The decree required 3 things. First, every traffic stop in the Oak Ridge Estates corridor and the surrounding residential areas would be reviewed monthly by an independent oversight board for a period of 5 years. Second, all body camera footage from disputed stops would be available to the public within 30 days of a complaint being filed without redaction except for legitimate privacy protections. Third, the prior complaints against Croft and any similar complaints filed during the oversight period would be reviewed by an independent investigator, not by the department's Internal Affairs Division alone. That was it. No lengthy training mandates. No detailed procedural frameworks. 3 requirements, each of which addressed a specific mechanism by which the pattern had been allowed to continue. Beverly Oates, when the terms of the decree were reported, said, "That's it. That's all we ever needed. Someone to look." The decree was signed on a Wednesday morning in a conference room in the federal courthouse. Eldon was not present. He was across the building in his courtroom presiding over the first day of a civil negligence trial. His bailiff had brought him a copy of the signed decree during the lunch recess. Eldon had read it at his desk. He had set it in the left-hand drawer under the notepad and the Fallon letter. Then he had gone back to the courtroom. 6 weeks after the night on Oak Ridge Road, on a Tuesday morning in early November, when the leaves on the maples had gone gold and the air had the specific clarity that comes after the first hard frost, Gordon Hatch walked down his driveway with a gift basket. It was a good gift basket, the kind that comes from the kind of store that does not put prices on things. It had a bottle of wine in it and some kind of artisan preserves, and a cedar-smoked cheese wrapped in wax paper, and a small card attached to the handle by a ribbon that said, "With sincere apologies." He had been meaning to bring it for 5 weeks. He had found reasons each week not to. The timing wasn't right. Eldon seemed busy. The news coverage was still ongoing, and it felt like intruding. He needed to find the right words first. He was still working out what to say. The truth, which he had not admitted to himself directly until the night the 47-second clip appeared on the evening news, and he had sat in his kitchen and watched it again, was that he did not know what to say because there was nothing adequate to say. And the inadequacy of what was available to him was more comfortable to sit with if he kept it at a distance. He had watched the clip 4 times. He had watched it, and he had seen himself, not literally, he was not in the footage, but he had watched the scene on the side of Oak Ridge Road, the rain and the lights and the man against the roof of his own car. And he had understood with the specific clarity of a person confronting something they have been not confronting for a long time that he had driven past that. He had seen his neighbor in handcuffs, and he had driven past. He had known. He had known. They had waved at each other across their lawns for 11 years. He had drunk beer in that man's driveway and talked about road construction. He had known through the glass of his car window in the rain that the man in handcuffs was Eldon Pruitt, his neighbor who had lived 3 houses down from him for 11 years. And he had made a calculation, not a conscious one, not a deliberate one. The kind of calculation that happens in the 2 seconds before consciousness catches up to it, the kind that is built not from malice but from something older and more ambient, something that had been deposited in him over a lifetime and that he had never examined because he had never had to. He had seen a black man in handcuffs and the word criminal had arrived in his head before the word neighbor, and he had driven past. He had spent 6 weeks sitting with this. He was at Eldon's mailbox when the front door opened and Eldon came down the driveway in his coat and his briefcase heading to his car. Eldon saw him. He stopped. Hatch stepped forward holding the basket and said the words he had been rehearsing. "I saw the news. The video. I'm so sorry. That night I drove past. I didn't realize." Eldon looked at him. The look was not warm and not cold, but entirely present the way Eldon's face was always present, fully attending to what was in front of it. I didn't realize Hatch heard himself saying. I thought. He stopped because he could not finish the sentence. Because finishing the sentence required saying the thing that the sentence was about, and the thing that the sentence was about was the calculation he had made in 2 seconds looking through a rain-streaked window. Eldon waited. Then he said, "You thought exactly what the officer thought, Gordon." Not unkindly. Not with heat. With the measured level honesty of a man who has spent 30 years in rooms where the truth has to be said clearly, or it loses its usefulness. You saw a black man in handcuffs in your neighborhood, and your first assumption was not that your neighbor was in trouble. It was that the police had done their job. Hatch's face went red. "The uniform made you a stranger to me," Eldon said in 30 seconds. 11 years of living on the same street didn't slow you down at all. The words were quiet. They were not an accusation in the legal sense. They were a description. An accurate, precise, entirely fair description of what had happened. Hatch opened his mouth, closed it. He said, "It wasn't like that. I panicked." And Eldon said, "I know. That's exactly what I'm telling you. The panic came before the recognition. That is not nothing, Gordon. That is the whole thing." He did not take the gift basket. He said with the formal politeness of a man maintaining a boundary he had decided on, "Have a good morning, Gordon." He got into his car. He pulled out of the driveway carefully the way he always did. He did not look back. Gordon Hatch stood at the mailbox holding the basket and the cedar-smoked cheese and the bottle of wine and the small card that said, "With sincere apologies," and he stood there for a long time after the Mercedes turned the corner and was gone. He thought about what Eldon had said. He thought about the 2 seconds in his car on Oak Ridge Road. He thought about the specific, immediate nature of the calculation, how it had arrived before thought, before recognition, before 11 years of neighborliness. He had always thought of himself as a reasonable man, a fair man, a man without the particular prejudice that he associated with a specific kind of person, a kind of person he was certain he was not. He stood at the mailbox and understood with the slow and uncomfortable clarity of genuine self-examination that reasonable and fair and without prejudice are not the same thing as safe to look at yourself clearly, and that he had been confusing them for a very long time. He carried the basket back inside. He did not throw it away. He put it on the kitchen table and he sat down in front of it, and he stayed there for quite a while. Paul Greer served his suspension during the month of October. He spent the first week of it doing the things that people in suspended animation tend to do, filling his hours with activity that was not quite purposeful enough to deserve the name. Watching more television than he had watched since he was a teenager, running long distances in the mornings in a way that was more about moving than about fitness. He slept too much. He ate in the distracted way of a person whose mind is somewhere else. The second week, he started writing. Not the written statement that had been produced on the night in the bullpen in block print, and it had been submitted and witnessed and had become part of the official record. This was different. This was the writing you do when you need to understand something, and understanding it requires putting it into words that no one else is going to read. He wrote about the 14 months he had been on the force. He wrote about training under Croft. He wrote about the 11 stops he had watched. He wrote about the specific mechanism by which silence becomes a practice. How the first time you say nothing feels like a choice, and the second time feels like a policy. And by the third time you have built a version of yourself that doesn't say anything, and you are so accustomed to that version that you have stopped noticing its aversion. He wrote about the night on Oak Ridge Road. He wrote it from the beginning, the moment the plate ran clean, the moment the documents came back valid, the moment Croft said systems wrong. He wrote about what he had known. He wrote about what he had said, which was Mitch the plates came back clean. There's no probable cause. He wrote about what he had then done, which was nothing. He wrote, "I said one thing. I said it once. I said it quietly. And when he dismissed me, I went to the passenger side of the car and pointed my flashlight at the back seat and waited for it to be over. That is the shape of my failure. It's not that I didn't know, it's that I knew, and I said one quiet thing, and then I stopped. I stopped because he was my training officer, and because I had 11 months in and he had 4 years, and because the department had closed 3 complaints against him, and I had been trained without anyone saying the words to understand that closed complaints meant approved behavior. That is not an excuse. That's an explanation of the machine I allowed to operate through me. He wrote this and he read it back and he did not feel better. He had not expected to feel better. He had expected to feel clear, and he did feel clear in the cold and uncomfortable way that clarity sometimes feels when the thing it illuminates is not something you wanted to see. He wrote Eldon Pruitt a letter. He sent it to the federal court address listed in the public filing because that was the address he knew, and because sending it to the courthouse felt right, sending it to the place where Eldon Pruitt did his work, rather than to his house where it would arrive on his private doorstep uninvited. The letter was 4 pages. It said what it said, and it did not ask for forgiveness because Greer had decided that asking for forgiveness was a request that placed a burden on the person who had been wronged, and the person who had been wronged had not asked to bear any more burdens on this subject. He said I knew. I said one quiet thing, and then I stopped. That is the truth, and I will carry it. Eldon's response arrived 10 days later. It was 1-page typed formal in the way that Eldon's written communications were formal, precise, and unhurried, without warmth that was not earned, and without coldness that was not necessary. It said a number of things briefly, and it ended with one sentence that Greer read 4 times and then folded the letter and put it in the drawer of his desk in the apartment where he was living alone since the suspension. The oath you swore was not to your training officer. It was to the people outside the car. Greer returned to the force on the 1st of November. He had been reassigned at his own request to the Millhaven district, which was on the other side of the county and which he had never worked before, and where he knew no one. His first week back, he made 6 traffic stops. On each one, he got out of the car first. He walked to the driver's side. He said good evening before he said anything else. He listened to what the driver said. He looked at the documents he was given, and he looked at the documents as information to be evaluated on their own terms, not as props in a story he had already decided on. On his 3rd stop, a Thursday afternoon, he pulled over a young black man whose taillight was out. He had run the plates before the stop, and the plates were clean, and he had said so to himself out loud in the car before he got out. Plates are clean. Taillight is out. That is all. He walked to the driver's side. He said good evening. The young man said good evening back, and his hands were already on the wheel, and he was looking straight ahead, and there was something in the set of his jaw, a specific practiced stillness that Greer recognized. He said, "Your taillight's out. Right rear. Wanted to let you know." He wrote a warning, not a citation. He handed it through the window, and he said, "Have a good evening, sir." He walked back to his cruiser. He sat there for a moment after the other car pulled away. He was not a hero. He had not done anything that deserved a commendation. He had done the minimum required of a person who had sworn an oath and who was trying a day at a time to figure out what that oath actually meant in the moment when it was being asked of him. That was what he had learned. That it is asked of you in moments you do not choose, and that the moments do not announce themselves, and that you will not always know, while it is happening, that it is happening. You only know afterward. The question is what you do with that knowing. The church on Delmar Street had been on Delmar Street for 61 years. It had been built with the labor of 42 families who had come to Harlow County in the 1950s and 1960s looking for work, and who had founded and who had built the things that people build when they intend to stay: a school committee, a neighborhood association, a church. The building had been modest at the start, and was still modest, and its modesty had never been a source of shame, but of a specific kind of pride. The pride of a community that had built something that belonged to itself. Reverend Thomas Albright had been the pastor for 19 years. He was 67 years old, and he had the build of a man who had once been large and had arrived at his current age with most of that largeness still present, concentrated now in his shoulders and his voice. He had grown up in this county, had left it for seminary, had come back because there was a church on Delmar Street that needed a pastor, and he had been trained to understand that when the place where you are needed and the place where you are from are the same place, that is not a coincidence. He had known Eldon Pruitt's mother for 27 years. Claudette Pruitt had sat in the 3rd pew from the front for 27 years, which is the kind of consistency that deserves its own kind of acknowledgement. She had been one of those women who hold a community together by the specific gravity of their presence, not loud about it, not requiring recognition for it, simply present and steady in a way that other people navigate around without always knowing they are navigating around anything. She had told Thomas once after a sermon on perseverance, she always told him her thoughts after sermons briefly and directly in the way of a woman who had not come to church to be passive, that she had a son who was going to be one of the ones who made things right. She had said it with a certainty that was not maternal boastfulness, but something closer to testimony, as if she had observed something factual and was reporting it accurately. He thought about her on the Sunday morning 8 weeks after the incident on Oak Ridge Road, watching Eldon Pruitt walk through the front doors of the church. Eldon had not been here in 4 months. The trial and the preparation and the slow demolition of the weeks since he had been carrying a great deal, and sometimes the carrying takes everything and there is nothing left for Sundays. He came in without announcement. He took a seat in the third pew from the front, and he folded his hands in his lap, and he sat the way his mother had sat, with the particular earned stillness of a person who has come to a room where they do not need to perform. Albright saw him from the chancel. He held the recognition quietly and kept it to himself during the announcements and the opening hymn and the scripture reading. When he stood to preach, he did not preach about the incident. He did not name Dale Croft. He did not name Eldon Pruitt from the pulpit. He did not turn the morning into commentary on current events, which in his experience tends to produce heat without producing light. He preached about dignity. Not dignity as a concept, not dignity as a topic for academic theology. Dignity as a thing that people carry in their bodies as a physical reality, as tangible as bone, as present as breath. He preached about the specific kind of dignity that cannot be removed by force. That does not depend on recognition to exist. That survives the things that are done to it specifically because it was never located in those things in the first place. Not in a title, not in a credential, not in the opinion of the man with the flashlight, or the man with the handcuffs, or the neighbor in the car who looked away. He talked about Claudette Pruitt. He said her name. He said, "This woman cleaned other people's houses for 40 years. She got up early every morning, and she went to homes that were not hers, and she made them clean. And she went home, and she made her own home clean, and she raised a son, and she sat in this pew, and she came to this building to be reminded every Sunday of the thing she already knew, that her worth was not located in what she cleaned, or where she cleaned it, or for whom." He said, "She walked into every room with her head level, not proud in the brittle way of someone who needs to prove something. Level, the way a horizon is level. Because she had decided somewhere along the way, and I suspect it was a decision she made more than once, the way real decisions usually are, that she was not going to let the world's opinion of her become her opinion of herself." The congregation was very still. In the third pew from the front, Eldon sat with his hands folded and his head up and his eyes on Thomas Albright, and something in his face was moving not visibly, not in a way that anyone 3 pews back could have described, but moving the way things move under a surface that is being held very still by considerable effort. Albright said, "The robe doesn't make you worth protecting. You are worth protecting. You always were, so is everyone in this room. So is everyone who has ever sat in the back of a police car in this county who didn't have a robe to reveal." He let the silence hold. "The question we have to sit with," he said, "is not whether we know this. We know this. The question is whether we act like we know it. Whether we act like it is true of ourselves, and whether we act like it is true of every other person we encounter in the dark, in the rain, on the shoulder of a road when no one is watching, who we think of first." After the service in the line at the door, Thomas Albright took Eldon's hand in both of his. He did not say anything. He shook the hand for a moment longer than the ritual required. Eldon looked at him, and Eldon nodded once, and that was all. Some things are complete without words. The morning of the attorney swearing-in ceremony was a Tuesday in November. The sky above Harlow County was the specific gray of late fall, not threatening, not dark, just gray. The sky of a season settling into itself, the sky of days that are short and cold and have their own particular quality of light, a quality that makes everything look both sharper and more serious than it does in summer. Eldon arrived at the courthouse at 7:30. He used the private entrance, the one that connected to the judicial wing, the entrance he had used every working day for 22 years. The security officer at the door, a man named Winston, who had been working this door for 9 years, and who had the unhurried warmth of a man who genuinely liked his job, said good morning, and held the door and said quietly as Eldon passed, "Good to see you, Judge." The way he said it carried something, not drama. Winston was not a dramatic man, but a specific quality of meaning, the way people say ordinary things when the ordinary things have recently had their ordinariness tested and have come back intact. Eldon said, "Good morning." He meant it. His chambers smelled of lemon furniture polish and old paper and the particular silence of a room that had been waiting in the dark and was now being asked to be itself again. The desk lamp threw its familiar circle of light across the surface of the desk. The briefs for tomorrow's docket were stacked where his clerk had left them, neat and sequenced. The photograph of Diana was where it always was, catching the lamplight at the angle that made her look as she always looked in that photograph, like she was about to say something that was going to be exactly right. He set his briefcase down. He opened the top left drawer, and he took out the small spiral notepad. He opened it to the page from 5 weeks ago. The handwriting from that night block print, careful, the handwriting of a man who had written things down in difficult circumstances and had learned long ago to make his notes legible, even when his hands were not entirely steady. He read what was there: the badge number, the time, the exact words, the names. He read it all the way through. Then he closed the notepad and placed it in the drawer and closed the drawer. He crossed to the corner of the room where the wooden valet stand held the robe. It had come back from Harrington's dry cleaning the previous Thursday. The woman at the counter had called him herself when it was ready. She had seen the news, and she had called to say that she had cleaned it personally, which she did not do for most garments anymore, and that it was ready. She said it in the matter-of-fact way of a person doing something because it was the right thing to do, and not requiring the doing of it to be acknowledged. The robe was immaculate. Every pleat pressed. The heavy black fabric restored to its full weight and authority, without a mark, without a wrinkle, without any trace of the rain and the indignity it had been made to endure. Eldon stood in front of it. He stood there for a long time, without reaching for it. He was thinking about 3 people who were going to stand in his courtroom in 45 minutes and take an oath that he had taken 22 years ago. Deja Whitmore, who had called him from a parking lot 6 years ago in tears, and who had not given up, and who was going to stand in that courtroom today with the composure of a woman who had earned everything she had. Calvin Forsyth, whose father Eldon had known before Calvin was old enough to know him, who carried in his face the particular seriousness of a person who understands that what they are doing is not just for themselves. And a third attorney, a young man named Reggie Torres, who Eldon had not yet met but whose application file he had read, and in whose brief personal statement, 3 paragraphs direct and unadorned, he had recognized the voice of someone who was going to take the work seriously. 3 people at the beginning of what they were going to become. He thought about his mother, about the third pew from the front, about the way she had said what she had said to Thomas Albright with the flat certainty of testimony rather than hope. He thought about the back of a police cruiser in the rain, the smell of it, the cold of the partition against his knee, the sight of his neighbor's taillights disappearing around the bend. He thought about the word costume, and then he reached for the robe. He slid his right arm through the bell sleeve, then his left. He pulled the fabric up over his shoulders, and this was always the part that had a specific quality to it, had always had it from the first time he put it on, 22 years ago. The weight of it settling across his shoulders and down his back. Not heavy in the way of burden, heavy in the way of substance. The weight of something real. He zipped it up the front. The sound of the zipper was loud in the quiet room, definitive, the sound of a thing being completed. He adjusted the collar. He smoothed the fabric down his chest. He walked to the window and stood in front of the glass and looked at his reflection. He saw a man who had been tested by the same system he had dedicated his life to serving. He saw a man who had been handcuffed in the rain on a road he had driven 11,000 times, whose life's work had been held up in a flashlight beam and called a costume, whose neighbor had looked at him and driven past. He saw a man who had sat in the back of a police car and made a decision that was about something larger than himself, and who had carried that decision through to the end, and who was now standing here with his robe on and 3 young attorneys waiting in the courtroom. He did not see a victim. He saw a judge. The bailiff's knock on the chamber door was soft, respectful, the practiced knock of a man who understood the quality of the moment before it. "All rise, Your Honor." His voice through the door was warm. "Courtroom's full. They're ready for you." Eldon looked at his reflection one moment longer. He thought about what Thomas Albright had said about the robe not making you worth protecting. About being worth protecting already, about everyone in that congregation, about everyone in the back of every police car in this county. About Claudette Pruitt cleaning other people's houses with her head level, about dignity not being located in the things that are done to it. The robe was not what made him a judge. He had been a judge in the truest sense of what that word required long before the robe. He would be one long after. The robe was a promise he had made at 38 years old to a room full of people who needed someone to stand between them and the places where power forgets itself. He had kept that promise every day since. He would keep it today. He turned from the window and walked to the private door that led directly to the bench. The door he had walked through 10,000 times, the door through which judges enter, so that the courtroom stands before it sees them, so that the standing is for the position and not the person, so that the law that the position represents is the thing being honored. The door opened. The bailiff's voice from inside the courtroom, clear and carrying, "All rise," the sound of a room coming to its feet. Eldon Pruitt walked to the bench and sat down. He placed his hands flat on the surface of the bench, palms down, the way he had always done it, grounding himself in the physical reality of the room, in the weight of the wood beneath his hands, in the presence of the people in front of him. He looked out at the courtroom. 3 young attorneys in the front row standing with the rest. Deja Whitmore with her chin up, Calvin Forsyth with his hands at his sides. Reggie Torres, whom Eldon was meeting for the first time, looking at the bench with an expression that Eldon recognized, the expression of a person understanding for the first time in the embodied sense what they have committed themselves to. The gavel was waiting. He picked it up. The law was a promise. He had always believed this, not a guarantee and not a comfort, and not something that worked perfectly or even well by default. A promise which means something that has to be made and renewed and fought for and held to account over and over in every ordinary Tuesday morning and every terrible midnight and every ordinary room where someone is choosing how to use whatever power they have been given. The gavel came down. Court was in session. If there was a moment in this story that made you stop, really stop, not just pause, I'd be willing to bet it wasn't the arrest. It was Gordon Hatch's taillights disappearing around the bend. Because most of us, if we're honest, have been Gordon Hatch at least once. Not the officer, the neighbor, the person who saw something and made a calculation before we even knew we were calculating. The person who told themselves it was fine. It was probably fine. The police had a reason. That is the harder question this story leaves behind. Not was the officer wrong, he was, and he is facing the consequences of it. But what do we do in the 2 seconds before our best selves catch up to our first instincts? Judge Eldon Pruitt didn't need Gordon Hatch to save him that night. But the next person who gets stopped on that road might. If this story called something up in you, something you recognized, something you've carried, something you've seen, then you already understand why we waited until the very last scene to show you the robe going back on. Because the ending isn't the arrest, and it isn't the charges, and it isn't the badge being turned in on a Tuesday afternoon. The ending is a man choosing one more time to show up. If that landed for you, hit the like button right now. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story like this one. And leave us a comment. Have you ever driven past something you should have stopped for? We read every one. This story is a fictional dramatization created for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental.